There are very few films like Mickey 17. This was a movie that was supposed to come out in March of last year, but it's had its release date changed 5 times, which seemed absolutely crazy to me considering this was directed by Bong Joon Ho. He's the guy that won Best Director and Best Picture for his film Parasite back in 2019, so it did seem really strange that Warner Brothers would spend $120 million on his next film and then just have it sitting on a shelf for over a year. Now that I've seen the film, I can understand why they were a little bit nervous. So this is a science fiction movie set in the future where a colony ship is traveling to a new planet and Mickey's job is to be the expendable. He essentially does all the dangerous jobs where he's definitely going to get killed. So whether that's going out and getting radiation poisoning or just eating the funky food that they're trialing, every time Mickey dies, his body gets reprinted and his memory is re-uploaded onto the new body. That's a great concept for a movie, and it's great that Warner Brothers spent the $120 million to get it made because it just looks and feels like a kind of movie they don't make very much of anymore. Part of that feeling is that it's just so rare to see great big sets like this in a lot of movies nowadays, but the other thing is just the tone of it. It just feels so singular. If you've seen either of Bong Joon Ho's other English language films, Snowpiercer or Okja, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Just like those films, there are some characters here that are really over the top. Because so much of cinema is so grounded and based in reality, I just really love stuff that does go a little bit over the top. It obviously centers around Mickey, and he is a character that I just absolutely loved. Usually with bigger budget sci-fi, the main character is, you know, a cool guy. They sort of lean towards being action heroes. And you could imagine Robert Pattinson playing that kind of character, but Mickey is absolutely nothing like that. He's this kind of dumb, weak-willed but lovable mess of a person, and it's just so great to see a movie centered around that kind of character. And the performance that Robert Pattinson gives in this movie is absolutely incredible. I think he's definitely an actor that I will go and see whatever he does now just to see what kind of performance he gives. Because he just seems absolutely determined to never do the same thing twice or never use the same voice twice. So every time you see him, he's doing something completely different. And he just takes his character where you feel like a lot of actors could have done a perfectly fine job, but just does something really different and interesting with it. The movie is called Mickey 17 because Mickey has already died 16 times already, so the version that we start with is Mickey 17. And so because this guy has already died 16 times already, his self-esteem is a little bit low, but Robert Pattinson just makes him feel so lovable. But even though the movie had such a good central character and such a good performance, I did feel like they didn't develop him enough because the core concept is great. I thought there was a lot to explore with the whole premise of printing humans. Mickey is essentially immortal because he can be continually reprinted, but then defined as expendable. There's this really interesting question about what the value of his own life is and whether he has any agency over it. He really does just let life and death just happen to him, and as the movie goes on, I thought it kept on throwing interesting challenges that make him question who he is. And I was excited to see where that would go, but the end of the movie really didn't work for me. And part of the problem is everyone else in this movie, because there's a great range of side characters. You've got Mark Ruffalo hamming it up as this Trumpian type character. He's the leader of this space cult essentially. His wife, Toni Collette, who's equally as crazy. You've got Steven Yeun, who's the sort of unreliable, dodgy friend to Mickey. There's others as well, and I liked them all, but there was a point where it started to feel like there was just too many characters in this movie. And so despite Mickey being the main character, the title character, he does start to fall to the wayside a little bit. And again, in a movie that I felt a lot of it was exploring Mickey's individual agency, it felt weird to me that he started to get lost in the ensemble. And I almost wonder if they felt that themselves whenever they were editing, because there's a character who becomes quite prominent in the middle portion of the film, and you think it's setting things up for later, but then she just completely drops out of it with very little wrapping up or explanation. It does make the film feel a little bit bloated and messy, which is strange because part of what I love about Bong as a filmmaker is just how specific his camera feels, because it's an absolutely wonderfully shot film. It looks fantastic, but it does have that bloat problem, and it's like that right from the start. The opening sequence for this movie is really quite long, and it takes a long time to cover all the backstory that you need to finally get into what actually feels like the real story, where things really start to move and start happening. And look, I still enjoyed the intro, it's still interesting, but I do think it throws the pacing off a little bit, and because so much of it is set up, I think I would struggle a lot more with it on rewatch. Again, the film still is very charming, and it is always interesting to see what a director does after they've won 2 of the biggest accolades in the industry with Best Director and Best Picture, because once you've got those, you're going to have a much easier time getting whatever the hell you want to make funded. And so for better or worse, this does seem to be Bong unrestrained, but I can understand now, having seen it, why Warner Brothers were a little bit nervous about it, because it does feel very messy and the characters are so interconnected that it would be really hard to try and trim it down. And unfortunately, it does seem like they were right to be nervous about it, because it's not setting the box office on fire, which is a shame, because I want more films like this to exist, especially just science fiction as a genre in general, but it is looking like it's going to get harder and harder for these kind of films to get made. But if you've seen Mickey 17, let me know what you thought in the comments below, and if you want to make sure that you don't miss anything coming up on the channel, make sure to subscribe.